Hello there, welcome to the Raw podcast. My name is James Copley, and today I am joined by Matt Scrafton of the Burnley Express to preview this weekend's game at Turf Moor. Matt, how are you doing? How are you adjusting to Premier League life once again?
Yeah, very well, thank you. The Premier League is familiar sort of start for Burnley. As I'm sure we'll get onto, it was a bit of a mixed opening day. They actually played fairly well, but sort of familiar story in terms of just coming up against a side that were too good and were clinical when the chances came.
We'll come to that in a second, but I want to talk about transfers. How has Burnley's summer looked so far? From my point of view, I would suggest of the three promoted clubs, it feels like Burnley on paper have done the most sort of underwhelming business, if that makes sense. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's any better or worse, but in terms of having caught the imagination of other footballing fans and grabbing headlines, I feel like Leeds and Sunderland have done that a bit better. Again, not that that means anything going forward, but I just haven't heard too much about Burnley this summer.
Yeah, I think that's, as you sort of touched upon there, I think it's more to do with perhaps what the business that Sunderland especially, but Sunderland and Leeds have done, because Burnley's business has been fine. I mean, they brought in 9 players. I think they've moved on 9 or 10, so it's still been a busy summer, as Burnley's windows tend to be nowadays. You go back to the Sean Dyche era, and they were lucky to sign 1 player every summer. Now it seems to be the case where it is a revolving door every summer, which again, a lot to do is, if you're getting relegated and then come back up the next year, that's going to happen a lot. But it's been a good summer business. It's not like it's been a poor summer, but obviously they did have the blows of losing CJ Egan-Riley on a free, and then Josh Brownhill, still not chosen his new club yet, but he sort of did put a statement saying he's not going to re-sign for Burnley. So they were obviously 2 massive players from last season, and then obviously the James Trafford one to Man City, which. While that was obviously a blow to lose him, given how well he did last season, that wasn't as much of a blow because it was expected. The Burnley fans knew that one was coming. The CJ Egan-Riley and Josh Brownhill losing 2 such key players on free transfers was obviously a massive setback. But they have brought in some really good players. As I said, they've made 9 signings. It's not like they haven't been busy. It's probably just a bit more under the radar. But then obviously the standout one of Cal Walker, which came out of nowhere. That's a really good signing, and from what I've seen of him so far, obviously from the first game and summer as well, there's been no indication that his pace is gone anywhere. I know there's some suggestion over the summer, obviously that England game against Senegal, that maybe he was over the hill, and I know he didn't do particularly pull up any trees in AC Milan on loan last season, but from what I've seen, he looks like he's going to be a really good acquisition. And then there's some good signs as well. Some players that people might not have heard of. People like Clinchy Hartman at left back, who's coming from Feyenoord. He's a really good player. It was only a couple of summers ago he was linked with Chelsea. And I do suspect if he stays fit, he probably won't be at Burnley for too long. They have brought in some good signings. And as we saw recently, they bought the 3 of Martin Dubravka. I'm sure your listeners will know from his time at Newcastle, very experienced goalkeeper. Amanda Broya is a bit of an interesting one there. Not sure how he'll do. Again, he needs to stay fit. But if he does, that's Burnley have needed a striker for a while now, maybe 2 or 3 years. So that'll be an interesting one. And then obviously Leslie Ugo from Chelsea as well, who again he's only a sub on Saturday, but he's definitely got height and physicality about him, which again is something Burnley have really needed. And then Scott Parker says they still need 2 or 3. So yeah, it's probably a busy end to the window. But yeah. They look like they've done okay so far. I wouldn't say the business is bad, but they definitely need another at least another 2, I'd say, to hopefully take them to give themselves a better chance of staying up.
So what was the story with Josh Brownhill then? Because I assumed he would re-sign and stay at Burnley. He's obviously been at the club for a long time and hugely important to Burnley. I was expecting him to stay and try and prove himself in the Premier League again. What happened there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one there. A lot of the Burnley fans are asking the same thing. So it was sort of an ongoing thing throughout the back end of last season. We spoke to Josh quite a lot, and it was always, I'm just concentrating on getting Burnley promoted, and then we'll see what happens. Which looking back, that was always sort of code for I'm not re-signing. He's been linked with a lot of clubs, and he's been linked with likes of like Everton and Wolves and West Ham and teams of that nature. The not criticism, but the scrutiny from Burnley fans is that in the Championship, he is a cheat code. He's far too good for the Championship. but almost similar to Burnley, can he make that step up to the Premier League? He's not necessarily done it with Burnley. My argument would have been, well, he's just scored 18 goals in the Championship. He took on the role of being captain under Scott Parker. He has improved. I think this is the perfect time for him to step up with Burnley and show those improvements in the Premier League. Because, yeah, you can go to an Everton, but you're not guaranteed to start every summer. At Burnley, you're the captain, you're starting every game. I think it would have been perfect for him. So for him not to stay and then still not to have a club when we're already, we're a week into the season, bit of a strange one. So, yeah, I mean, the argument, the suggestion is it's all about money, it's financial. I think there's some, involvement with the agent as well. So where he goes now, I mean, I think Leeds and Leicester would be a disappointing one for Burnley fans to see him drop back to the Championship. I know Leicester, a big club, and could probably pay him more wages, even though they're in the Championship. That would be a blow to lose him to a division below. Even Leeds, I know, in the same division, but a promotion rival from last season. Both sides finished on 100 points. He's second in Burnley. Him to go to Leeds would be a bit of a weird one. There's been some suggestion of a move to the MLS. I think Toronto was mentioned as a club. Again, that's speculation. Nothing sort of firmed up on that one. That would maybe make sense why he's not been sort of, got himself sorted out when the season's already started. But yeah, it's a strange one. There's been a lot of sort of those, sort of cryptic posts on his Instagram page. He's been
footballers love a cryptic Instagram post.
Yeah, train a lot with the private, coach, fitness coach, that sort of stuff, which I know has been in the news this last week. I think he's actually got the same fitness coach as the Preston player, which I know blew up the other week with Paul Heckenbottom. And then I think
I saw that video. Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, so it's a strange one, a really strange one. And he did post 3 or 4 days ago, suggesting something was potentially happening soon. But again, nothing happened, been announced since then. But you'd imagine, in the next week or two, it will get lined up. But yeah, definitely a blow for Burnley. Not to lose, just as a player, but off the pitch as well. He was growing into that sort of stature. He was the club captain on and off the pitch. So to lose that was definitely a setback for Scott Parker.
And looking from afar as well, you mentioned CJ Egan-Riley. I was really, really surprised to see him leave, a player that I really, really rate and believe could play the Premier League, no problem at all. Obviously, he's gone to Marseille now, chose not to extend his contract with Burnley. I believe he was offered terms. So reading between the lines, Matt, is it a little bit concerning that perhaps the level of wages hasn't been there for some of these players, or am I reading a little bit too much into it?
I think so, yeah. I think there's context with each sort of individual situation. The CJ Egan-Riley one was a really sort of peculiar circumstances where he's been at Burnley for, I think it's 3 or 4 years, never really got a look in. Under Vincent Kompany, he was 4th, probably 5th choice centre-back. He was loaned out to not just PSV, he loaned out to PSV's young side, I think called Young PSV. He's loaned out to them, didn't pull up any trees, went north of the border to Hibs, did okay, but there was no suggestion this season was coming. And then some say got lucky, but circumstance went in his favour that Joe Wall got injured early on, because Joe Wall was the partner to Maxime Esteve. He got injured within the first couple of months of the season. Egan-Riley came in having, not to go too far in depth, but at the start of last season, Burnley were a bit sort of all over the place during the transfer window. A lot of players were leaving after relegation. Egan-Riley played, I think, right back at one game. It was all a bit all over the place. But then he got the centre-back position alongside Maxime Esteve and never looked back. And as we all know with the records Burnley have, he was a massive part of that, conceding just 16 goals and the 30 clean sheets. But I suspect him moving on had more to do with what happened before. Egan-Riley was never really been, through no fault of Vincent Kompany. Burnley did have good centre-back options ahead of him, but he was just, maybe he got to a point where he didn't feel like he was not respected, but probably wasn't. Well, put it this way, Egan-Riley did an interview a few months ago and he sort of said, I think I could have done this with Burnley 2 or 3 years ago.
Right, okay, so he's got that axe to grind.
Yeah, maybe not an axe to grind, but potentially. But that's not, as I said, no fault of Vincent Kompany either, because Burnley did have good centre-back options. He was just 4th or 5th choice down the line and never got a look in. Yeah. So he had that one good season, and good season is an understatement. He was excellent last season. He was probably up there with the Brownhills, the Traffords, and the Esteves, within that top 3 or 4 players. And once his contract was, running down, he had options. Also, there were links with Strasbourg, which was a bit of a strange one, but I think there was some sort of connection there with Chelsea. They're owned by the same club. And obviously going to Marseille, going to France, Burnley lose out on more compensation as well, which is just make it even worse. But Yeah, Burnley were sort of keen to stress that they made him a very sort of healthy financial package. And it was just one of those really. So I think that's more sort of context of how it had gone the last 3 or 4 years, as opposed to just Burnley couldn't afford to give him the wages that he wanted.
And the Trafford departure as well. What are the Burnley fans' sort of perspective and view on that? Because again, from an outsider's perspective, you've had him for a couple of years. He's been absolutely fantastic. Advanced himself, advanced the club. You've got a good fee for him from Manchester City, obviously going back there. Perhaps maybe it's not as much as you could have if you hadn't negotiated that deal initially. But then again, if you don't negotiate that into the deal doesn't happen. And again, from an outsider's perspective, you mentioned Martin Dubravka. I think he's a very, very good replacement in my view. I think he's an excellent goalkeeper, very consistent. Obviously, been second to Nick Pope again, who Burnley fans know well. But I think Martin Dubravka's a top level goalkeeper.
Yeah, with Trafford, we've had that sort of weird situation where he's left the club with no ill will whatsoever, which doesn't seem to happen very often.
Similar with us and Joe Bellingham actually this season.
Yeah, there was no real ill will. People expected him to leave last summer. Obviously, that was close with Newcastle, but never happened. So it was almost like a bonus season, and they obviously got the most out of him and more so. So yeah, from what I've seen over the weekend, Burnley fans are really happy that he started for Man City. Did well, got another clean sheet, which is great for him. Obviously, it'd be interesting what he does now with Man City, looking at Donnarumma and Ederson moving on. That'd be interesting. But knowing James Trafford gets to know him quite well last season, he's not short of confidence. So he'll back himself to not only feature for Man City heavily, but then become England's number one within. Well, he's in a rush. Let's put it this way: he's in a rush to get his career to the top as soon as possible. So, yeah, great move for him. It sort of dragged on. Newcastle, your listeners probably love me saying this, but Newcastle made a meal of the whole thing. Going back to last summer,
it did sound like they made a bit of a meal of that, actually. Yeah. Considering, it sounded like the player was pretty convinced he was going to Newcastle as well. I know he's from Cumbria, so he's not far away, but there was interaction. Again, we're looking at social media and Instagram stuff, but there was interaction with Newcastle players. He was saying, Geordie dialect phrases, and it appeared like it was all done in his mind.
Yeah, well, considering it was dragged on from last summer, that looked like it's going to be close. Many people just assumed once the window opened, they swoop in within the first 2 or 3 weeks and it'd be done. Obviously, in hindsight, if Newcastle had made that bid in the first few weeks of the window, there's still that potential of Man City having the matching clause. So it might not have been easy as that, but I don't think Man City were probably as keen on, didn't have their sort of plans in place as early in the window. So Newcastle definitely missed out on the chance to get that done nice and early. The talk was Newcastle would go to 30 million, Burnley wanted 40. Burnley are quite a sensible club when it comes to, especially these sort of big deals. They'll get it done. Just somewhere in the middle is quite sensible. Or as it turned out, or how it was said to me, Man City agreed 31 million plus add-ons and a sell-on. So around, probably once it's done, we'll come around to about 34, 35 million, which to me, all summer I said, if Newcastle do that, it'll get done very easily. So the fact it didn't, I think they've only got themselves to blame. As we've seen elsewhere this summer, they've not been the most organised, let's say. So, but yeah, for Trafford, it's obviously a great move. There is part of me that thinks Newcastle would have suited him because he would have had that year with Nick Pope. And I think it would have been a bit more forgiving, whereas Man City, obviously, he's been thrown straight in. Great start. But again, obviously, it'd be interesting to see what happens with if he is going to be their number one or not. But I've no doubt whether it's this year or not, James Trafford will be a top Premier League keeper and England's number one, as I said, at some point sooner rather than later.
And coming into the new Premier League season, Burnley stylistically were one of the most sort of recognisable teams in the Championship, I would say. Last campaign, you knew what you were going to get. They were solid defensively. The goals conceded record was absolutely stupid, and they had some good attacking players, again, like Josh Brownhill. What is Burnley's strategy going to be under Scott Parker coming into the Premier League? Will that style of play have to evolve a little bit?
I think the style of play will be, I know it will be adaptable. Scott Parker came out and said it will be adaptable. There's been a lot of talk over the summer over systems. So last year, it was pretty much 4-2-3-1 every game. Obviously, there were sort of nuances in-game that would change sometimes, but in terms of starting a game, it would always be 4-2-3-1. On Saturday, it was a 3 at the back. It was a 3-4-3 sort of system with 2 10s behind the striker. And that's how they played against Lazio in the last friendly as well. Whereas before that, they'd sort of mixed it up. Don't know whether that's just trying things out or sort of to keep Tottenham on their toes ahead of the first game. But it does look like the three at the back will be something they'll be utilising a lot this season, especially against, well, I say against the teams they're not expected to beat, which is probably most of them. But it will certainly be interesting to see if it'll be 3 or 4 this weekend, where there'll be, as I'm sure we'll come on to, there'll be a bit more expectation or pressure on them to get a result at home against a team that I know Sunderland started well, but will still be seen as a relegation rival. In terms of style of play, one thing I was surprised by, not surprised, but Saturday, it wasn't a case of sit on the 18-yard box and just defend, which, again, some outside observers might think with Burnley, with their defensive record, they're just relying on that. They pressed high. They went after Tottenham. They picked their moments. It wasn't constant press. It wasn't a constant high line. It was game management. It was, if they felt Tottenham were panicking a little bit under pressure, they went after them. Other times, first 10, 15 minutes especially, when Tottenham came out, like a house on fire, like Thomas Frank said, Brentford always did. They struggled a bit first 10 minutes, but they were sensible. They sat in, and they gradually grew into the game. So I don't think they'll be rooted to one style. They certainly won't be rooted to one style like they were under Vincent Kompany, where it was, especially at the start, it was too naive. Although in defence of Vincent Kompany, he's got this reputation of wanting to pass out from the back for the whole season, and he didn't change. He did sort of change little bits here and there. It wasn't like they were constantly playing 5-yard passes across the goalkeeper's back line the whole season. That wasn't the case, but they'll certainly be a lot more adaptable this season, a lot more sensible, a lot of game management. But yeah, they won't be rooted to one style of play. They won't just pass it out. They won't just go long. And even if they do go long, we saw on Saturday, there were a few times with Cal Walker, it was a pinpoint 70-yard ball straight to Jane Anthony's foot. It wasn't hoofball. I don't think we'll see any team do that in the Premier League anymore. It was very calculated. So that was one thing I was impressed by on Saturday. Again, I'm sure we'll get into, despite the result, Burnley's performance was actually pretty good. It was pretty much as they could have done to get a result, but they would just found themselves on the wrong end of a clinical Tottenham side.
Well, I was going to come on to that actually, Matt, because I didn't watch the full 90, but I caught the highlights of Tottenham versus Burnley, and I'm just having a quick look at the stats, and they're not that dissimilar to the West Ham versus Sunderland stats, really, in terms of, Tottenham had 16 shots to Burnley's 14. Burnley obviously surrendered a lot of the ball, but it feels to me like the 3-0 scoreline perhaps was a little bit harsh, but I guess as sort of West Ham actually found out against Sunderland that if you don't take the chances, in which they had a couple in the first half against Sunderland, that you can be punished at this level.
Yeah, it was harsh. I don't think any Burnley fans would complain with losing the game, but losing the game 3-0 suggested it was almost similar to 2 years ago, where they're sort of, inviting their own trouble, making loads of gaffes and mistakes. That wasn't the case at all. Even looking at the goals, and there were certain things they could tighten up on. They can get closer to the marker, or they could do better to stop the cross. But even then, it's one ball into the box and with Charleston, really good finish. And then for the first hour of the game, it was even. Burnley more than matched Tottenham. And there was a key moment just before the hour mark, or two key moments. Hannibal goes through on goal and sort of delays. And as we all know in the Premier League, if you take a split second, especially with Tottenham, Mickey van der Ven will come in straight away, or Christian Romero will come in straight away. And then that chance goes. A minute later, Jane Anthony is also denied from 6-7 yards out. That's the chance. If it's 1-1, and at that point, Tottenham were panicking. The fans were, getting a bit anxious. The back line, you could tell them it was a bit, Spurs of last season, where defensively they were a bit frail. They equalised at 1-1. I'm not saying they go on to win the game. It's certainly, a nervous last half an hour, and they make Tottenham, if Tottenham go on to win the game, they make them work for it. Whereas, literally within a minute, a cross comes to the box, and I'm sure you've seen the goal with Charleston, overhead kick. And
what can you do?
that's the Premier League, and then Bernard Johnson. That was a bit of a soft goal to concede because it was on the counter, and Burnley sort of momentum was swung at that point, and the game was done. But that's the I hate the phrase fine margins, but that is the case where they should have scored at least one of those chances. Get it back to 1-1. It's a different game here. We're talking about a really sort of exciting, nervous end of the game. As it was, Tottenham get the 2, and the game just fizzles out, and it's sort of a non sort of event. So yeah, as there's context to the defeat. It wasn't a 3-0 defeat, as you might see from the outside. So weirdly, a lot of Burnley fans are quite encouraged by the performance because they've seen something to take from there. There's almost a blueprint there where, okay, yeah, we can go away to a Tottenham, a Man City, Liverpool, whatever, and we can not win the game, but we can stay in games and maybe get something. Which, as I touched upon 2 years ago, they were out of games within 20 minutes, half an hour. So there's progress there, but as we know, progress sometimes isn't enough in the Premier League. You need to make massive jumps to just to get a point at some of these clubs.
And this game on Saturday at Turf Moor between Burnley and Sunderland, it feels big already, doesn't it? I know that every game in the Premier League feels massive just because of the coverage and Monday Night Football and all of the pundits are out in force. It's discussed ad nauseum on TalkSport and everything and content creators. So it all feels very massive, doesn't it? But I just feel after the weekend like the narratives have already started to be written and there's almost a case of, oh, well, Sunderland have spent their money, so they look like they could potentially be okay. Burnley lost on the opening day. So there needs to be a reaction from Scott Parker's side, doesn't there? And it's you could see the narratives again sort of entrenching deeper if Burnley were to lose that game at home against Sunderland, a newly promoted side, a relegation rival. But if they can get a result, it could turn the season around, couldn't it? Whereas if you don't, it suddenly becomes a bit of a daunting task, and then you're looking at going another month without a win potentially, and it's such a crucial game for me. I think it's going to be hugely important. I think as well, given the little bit of history last year, I think Burnley versus Sunderland at the Stadium of Light, Burnley could count themselves a little bit unlucky. Sunderland were very robust defensively on that day. If Burnley had won that game, then they would have got up as champions. So I guess there's that little bit of edge to it. And of course, the game at Turf Moor with the two saved penalties from Wilson Isidore, the game ended up being a draw. That felt like a bit of a turning point in Sunderland's season as well. So I feel like there's a lot sort of riding on this, and there's a lot of history, a lot of narratives, and it's an exciting fixture.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no need to. Burnley fans know all too well. They've been in a situation so many times that they know that they're a bit of a yo-yo club. They know the Premier League is absolutely brutal. You have to be winning these games, or certainly not losing them. I mean, go back to 2 years ago under Victor Company. They beat Sheffield United home and away, and they took 4 points off Luton, and they still went down on 24 points. So you need to be winning these games and picking up points against the mid-table teams, maybe get the odd shock result here or there. Burnley obviously didn't do that last time. I suspect this year they will do more of that. Whether it's enough remains to be seen. But yeah, you can't be losing and say it's almost at the point now. I know you sort of joke about it, but you'd almost take a draw just to get a point on the board and then move on. But then beyond that, Burnley have got the fixtures are quite difficult. In the next few weeks, they've got Man United, they've got Man City, they've got Liverpool coming up as well beyond the international break as well. So this is a game where they look at it and think, right, yeah, we need to be winning this or certainly not losing. And I think Scott Parker's quite realistic about it. I always felt guilty asking after the game, sort of, how do you pick up the players ahead of a big game when we're only the second game of the season? But it is, and Scott Parker knows it as well. He's been in this situation before. He knows the score. So yeah, I don't think there's any sort of need to play it down. I don't want to play up like Sky Sports and hype into a massive event, but in terms of a game, Burnley can't be losing this one, and the fans are well aware of that.
And as an outsider, from your point of view, Matt, looking into the sort of Sunderland sphere, I know you're very busy covering Burnley day to day, but has the level of spending at Sunderland surprised you? Because it shocked me if you'd have said, even after the playoff final, to be honest, that we'd have sort of Granit Xhaka, sort of CDM, Habib Diarra 30 million and Simon Adingra, I would have been very, very surprised. I think the spending will probably surpass £150 million soon, looking upwards towards the 200 million mark if Sunderland can get a few targets over the line. It doesn't feel like they're done yet in the transfer market, and I think they've already signed 11 players for, a lot of them for big money. It's been a very sort of good summer for Sunderland, but also very strange and very surprising for me.
Yeah, I will caveat this by saying, as you touched on at the start, that I don't like giving a view on other clubs, or I don't pretend to be an expert, because the people listening to this right now will know a lot more than me. So I don't profess to be an expert on your business or anything. But all I can say is give my sort of outside view. The Granit Xhaka one impressed me. There was at one point I thought Sunderland were going down the route of Burnley 2 years ago, where they're saying a lot of impressive young talent, which is great. You need that in this world of PSR, because you need to be sent on these players. And Burnley have done it, to be fair. They sold Wilson Odobert last season to Tottenham, Sanderberg, etc. You need to do that. But I did think someone was going a bit too heavy. And we saw that with Burnley, where they were naive. Well, naive at times. They were naive a lot, and they did lack experience. They did lack a Kyle Walker, a Granit Xhaka. So when they did sign Xhaka, I thought, okay, that will make sense. Again, I don't profess to be an expert on the players they brought in, but they seem to be highly rated. In terms of the money they spent, surprised a little bit perhaps by the total, especially when say if there's more to be done. But I just think now, I think all three clubs have been quite sensible in terms of this is just what you have to do now. You have to do this now just to get par. Just to have stick any chance. Burnley spent 100 million 2 years ago during that summer window. I think in the end it was probably at 150, 160, and as we saw, finished with 24 points. So you need to be spending that money wisely just to be in with a shout of finishing 19th rather than bottom of the table. So to get to 17th, I mean, I felt it was a joke last season when the team that finished 17th last season was Tottenham, and they're in the Champions League this year. So it's just absolutely brutal. Although, when Burnley got promoted in May, I did look at the Premier League table. Think I'm not sure who you can catch. You can't catch Tottenham because they're going to have a much better season under Frank. As bad Man United were, they're not going to get relegated. I'm not sure who there is to catch now. Looking sort of 3 months on, and some clubs have had some poor summers. Brentford have also had
it's opened up a bit, hasn't it? It definitely has opened up.
Wolves, obviously, and West Ham, as you can tell me, their fans aren't happy with Potter or the ownership, by the sounds of it. So there are 4 or 5 clubs now where you think maybe. So I'm a lot more positive than I was 3 or 4 months ago in terms of the chances. And there are clubs that you catch up on. And I did watch Leeds last night. Obviously, I didn't watch Sunderland, but I did look Leeds last night. And first half especially, they looked competitive, really competitive. They looked really good side compared to Everton, who again look like they sort of need business doing, very, very quickly. So that's a positive for all 3, that there's teams there that are in the mix. Whereas last summer, I know Wolves started poorly, but that was always my concern is, Brentford might start the season poorly. And I know there's question marks over Keith Andrews, but the worst comes to the worst, they'll sack him in November and bring in a really good manager and they'll be fine. I mean, Brentford are a very sensible, stable club. It's no coincidence that they're in this position now because they've been well run for a number of years. So if it does become a poor situation, they'll sort it out within the next 2 or 3 months. But if there's 4 or 5 clubs in the mix, all it takes is for 1 or 2 of them to sort of stay within the bottom 3 or within that area. So, I think that's a positive for all 3 clubs. But as for the spending, I just think that's what you have to do now, just to bridge the gap to finish 19th. Never mind finish 17th, just to make sure you don't become Southampton. That's what you have to do nowadays.
Quickly, we'll whiz through a couple of little tactical topics and get your thoughts on some team news as well. But from a Sunderland perspective, I think it will be Regis Labrisse's favoured 4-3-3. You'll have Granit Xhaka in the middle, Habib Diarra and Noah Siddiqui. 2 pacey wingers in Talbi and Dingra. I imagine it'll be the same defence. Oh, no, possibly no, there might be a little change. Alderweireld might come in for Jensen Sealed. Up front, you'll have Eliza Mayenda, Trey Hume right back, Ronaldo left back, and it will be Robin Roofs in goal. He doesn't mind surrendering the ball, Matt, does Regis Labrisse, as you well know from the games last season. We surrendered the ball at times against West Ham, and I think that's interesting coming into the game at Turf Moor because I would suspect the onus would be on Scott Parker's side to sort of start the game well to get that home crowd up. I think that could suit Sunderland in the long run during the game if Burnley sort of don't score early. How do you think Scott Parker will set up his team against Sunderland?
Yeah, as I touched upon earlier, the main sort of talking point question mark is the system. If he goes the same as Tottenham with the 3 at the back, I'd imagine it'll be, if not the same start 11, very, very similar. The only sort of question mark is whether sort of Armando Broja comes in up front for Lau Foster, but he wasn't even on the bench on Saturday. And I asked Scott Parker about it, and he sort of said he's not really had a pre-season, so he needs a lot of physical work. So I'd be surprised if he starts straight away. If it's a 4-2, if he goes back to the 4-2-3-1, then you could maybe see 2 or 3 tweaks. Marcus Edwards is maybe the one that will come in on the wing because he didn't start on Saturday because he doesn't really suit the three at the back system. Sorry, because he's not really he can't play as a 10, but he's more of an out and out right winger who hugs the touchline sort of player. But I'd imagine personnel it'll be fairly similar as I touched upon. It wasn't like they need to rip anything up from Saturday. It's not like there were 3 or 4 terrible performances and anything like that. But Burnley are in a situation where they do have a good 6 or 7 players sort of not fully fit. Scott Parker's very, very sort of strict on he needs every player to have a pre-season. So that's why Ugo Chukwu didn't start, for example, because he's only just come in. So I'd imagine if he had a good week, he could start alongside Josh Cullen in midfield, and then Josh Laurent would drop out. So there are 2 or 3 potential changes, but I suspect, if I'm predicting right now, it won't be massive. It'll be tweaks here or there. In terms of the style of play, if Burnley have, if Sunderland sit back and Burnley have the ball, I don't see that being an issue. But they got used to that last season. Obviously, at the start of the season, there were a lot of issues where teams would just sit back and Burnley couldn't break them down. But as the season wore on, especially sort of beyond that Sunderland game, beyond sort of we got into February, March, April, they were more than used to being the team that had the ball and were expected to do things with it. So that won't be an issue. The only issue would be if the chances come their way, do they have the quality to put it away? Because that was the issue on Saturday. They had those first half, they had one or two. They had those two key ones in the second half, and they didn't stick any of them away. That's going to be the big sort of what can they do in the transfer market in the next week or two. The fans will want another striker. Obviously, Breyer's come back. If Burnley have a lot of the ball and they have the chance and they don't stick it away, then there's obviously, as you touched upon, the anxiety sets in. Someone then, threaten on the break. That's how I can see it maybe going. But I don't see it being an issue in terms of Burnley having the ball. That's fine. As I touched upon on Tottenham on Saturday, they actually looked better than I thought they would in terms of on the possession. It wasn't like, I don't know the possession stats, but it wasn't like, as I touched upon, they were sat on the edge of the 18-yard box for the whole game and were just waiting for chances. They grew into the game and were more than a match for Tottenham, so that will be fun.
I think this could be a tough game, Matt. I'm going to offer a prediction. I think this is going to be a score draw. I think 1-1 or 2-2. I think it could be a bit of a humdinger, and I'm quite excited about this. I think we'll actually learn a lot about both teams from this game. I mean, Sunderland were really, really impressive against West Ham, and there's a lot of positives to take. Huge amount of positives in terms of, Sunderland have a way to go with team cohesion. They obviously have some new players to come in, potentially not done in the transfer market. But the thing about the Premier League is you've got to back it up week to week, and you've got to maintain those levels of performance.
Yeah, I suspect it. It'll be similar. It'll be tight. I'd probably go. I'll go with a 1-1. Sorry, 1-0. I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't 0-0 or 1-1, similar to last season. Those two got with the goals short at Turf Moor. One of the other interesting thing to note is Burnley from Saturday. It was obvious they put a lot of emphasis on long throws and set pieces, whereas last season wasn't really a factor, which is weird, really. You think in the Championship, you think set pieces were a big part of their game, but I don't remember too many goals they scored from set pieces. Actually, set pieces were pretty poor. So they brought in a new set piece coach this summer. The old one left. So he's been brought in, and it was noticeable from the start that, as we've seen in the Premier League, when you are a lesser team, so to speak, when you're playing against Tottenham, you have to slow the game down. You have to, free kicks and there's long throws, and Cal Walker had the long throw into the box. And even it's quite weird late on. Zian Fleming came on late on off the bench. He's had a bit of a knock during the summer, but he came on as a late sub. And he was Burnley's number 9 for the back end of the season, finished the season with 14 goals. When he came on, he was doing long throws, which I thought was quite unusual for the striker to do long throws. He should be the one in the box, getting his head on it. Yeah, that's clearly something that they've, almost sort of Roy de Lap-esque. They've sort of gone through and trained and thought, right, who's got the long throw? And Kyle Walker's got it, and Zian Fleming's obviously could come up with trumps as well. So yeah, I'll maybe go for a 1-0 with from a set piece or a long throw, something like that. Something edgy, just to edge the game. But yeah, Burnley will certainly need something like that to go their way.
Well, brilliant. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Great analysis as ever. I wish you well for the weekend, but not too well, because I would quite like to see Sunderland get a result. Obviously, if you would like to read more about Burnley, you can find Matt Scrafton's work on the Burnley Express. If you'd like to catch up with all things Sunderland, we're over at the sunderlandecho.com. Thank you, as always, for watching, and we will catch you on Monday after the Burnley game.